Hello everybody, welcome back to the 80slashers.com YouTube channel. Um, in today's video, I thought I would do something a little different. I thought in today's what I'll talk about today is I like to go over kind of the history or the evolution of these films that we all love so much, the 80s slasher. Um, you know, we from like 1980 to 1989, a ton of these movies came out, and they all had a similar formula that they followed. Some differed, of course, but for the most part, there was an established formula that worked, that we as fans wanted and expected to see in these films. And as someone who who appreciates history, it's nice to go back and look and try to understand where this came from, like how this little subgenre of film came to be. So what I thought I would do is I kind of just want to go back a little. I'm starting back basically in the 1960s and talk about some of the more infamous, the more popular films that played an inspiration um, for the 80s slasher. Now there's a ton of films that had that inspired these films over the years. So I'm not going to talk about those. Like I said, I'm just going to talk about the ones that are the most famous that people might know of. Um, so yeah, so what we're going to do, we're going to clear these out of the way. And now the people like whoever you ask, there's people you'll talk to, and they'll say there's some slasher films dating back to the 1920s, the 40s, 50s. And that's true, that there's lots of films, old horror films that have slasher elements and whatnot. Um, so yeah, that's true. But like I said, I'm going to start with the big one. Now, if you ask anybody, the one movie who most people can agree on would be considered the granddaddy of the slasher uh, is 1960s Psycho, by obviously Alfred Hitchcock. Now, this film, I wouldn't classify this as a straight slasher, because there's a lot going on in this film. Um, there's mental illness. Um, there's kind of um, a robbery type of scheme. There's like a little police procedural work going on, but of course there's definitely slasher elements. Um, and if anyone who's ever seen this, if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you're quite familiar with the most infamous scene in this is the shower scene with Janet Leigh, and that is straight out of that is a straight up slasher scene. That's what we've all come to know and expect. It's been mimicked many times, almost scene for scene, in some of these 80s slasher films. Um, so yeah, this is 1960. This is really the beginning um, of what I consider to be, the proto slashers. Now, it wasn't just what was in this movie that kind of set the stage. Obviously, the content in Psycho um, was responsible for that, but Hitchcock himself, the way that this movie was marketed to the public, played a really important role of what's to come later on. He basically created a frenzy for this film. Um, the posters and the posters and all the literature that was made for this film was made to entice people. Like, if you're faint of heart or if you're scared, do not watch this movie. There was rules set in place that um, once the film started, they would lock the doors. They would close the doors on the theater, and it was a rule. Hitchcock said, like, no one is to come in once the movie starts, because he wanted to build that tension. And the word of mouth about this film just spread, and everybody had to go see this new Hitchcock film. Um, and it's kind of the basis for when the 80s slasher craze began. Um, with Friday the 13th, that's exactly the same thing. The word of mouth, people saying you have to check this out, and it just spread across the country, the world, and yeah, Psycho is really the first film to do that. So yeah, in that case, in that sense, it really is the granddaddy of the slasher film. So yeah, I just wanted to show that one first. Now, the next thing that I'm gonna get into, there was from the time this was released and the next genre of film I'm going to talk about, there was a lot of films. Again, there's Hitchcock had some more films actually. He had one titled Frenzy, um, and that one was also was kind of a slasher, and it was yeah, like it had a lot of slasher elements to it, and so there's lots of films like that that obviously took their inspiration from Psycho. But the the big link from this to the 80s slasher um, is happened in Italy, and it was the Italian genre of horror film that we commonly know now as the giallo. Now, the um, the first most people's first the film that most people consider the first giallo um, was a film called The Evil Eye, or it was also known as The Girl Who Knew Too Much. It was from 1963, so only 3 years after this, and it was from a director called Mario Bava. Um, that film was all filmed in black and white, and it was the beginning of like I said, most people consider it the first giallo film. But it wasn't until the following year, 1964, also from director Mario Bava, that this film came out, Blood and Black Lace. Now, even though Evil Eye, with the Girl Who Knew Too Much, is considered the first giallo film, this is like the granddaddy of the giallo genre. Um, this film, it just revolutionized everything. It set the stage for basically the next 10, 15 years. Um, Similar to the way that Friday the 13th set the stage for the 80s slasher craze. This film is fantastic. If you've never seen this film, highly recommend you check it out. All the tropes, the formula that the giallo craze um, started using, and which in turn the 80s slasher craze started to use, all came a lot from this film. You can see right on the cover, the killer was always kept, had a mask or face in shadows, a lot of black leather, gloves, always used like a large bladed weapon, almost exclusively hunting and killing young women. Um, there was usually a police investigator, cop, private investigator on the case trying to solve it. Um, and there was always a mystery, a reveal, and sometimes or not, there was a backstory as to the reason why the killer was doing what they were doing. That all came from this film, 1964, Blood and Black Lace. Um, just very stylistic, bloody kills, just a fantastic film. Now, after this, 1964, again, other directors, other movies, lots of giallos coming, but this was a big influence. 8 years later, 1971, we're going to jump up to here. Again, Mario Bava, same thing, same director, 1971, he released this movie, A Bay of Blood, also known as Twitch of the Death Nerve, which is a fantastic title. This is, man, this film is so good. Um, if I was to say there's one giallo film that was ripped off the most during the 80s slasher craze, it's this film. Um, there's so many elements in this film that were later taken in the 80s slasher. It, it's not even an argument that they ripped them off. It's clear that they ripped them off. The most infamous one, there's a scene in this movie, and this is from, like I said, 1971. There's a scene in this movie where it is identical to a scene from Friday the 13th Part 2. Um, it's the scene in both those movies where there's a couple in bed together and they get impaled by like a spear through both their bodies, right through to the floor. Um, Anyone who had saw the scene in Friday the 13th Part 2, it's an infamous kill. It's highly recognizable. And at the time, people were like, "Oh wow, that's an amazing kill." No one knew that 9 years prior to that, almost the exact same thing they did in this film. So it was highly influential. So obviously the people making the Friday the 13th films, that was Steve Miner, who was a producer on the first film, but he went on and directed the second film. Clearly had seen this movie. Someone in the making of Friday the 13th Part 2 had seen that movie, and had seen this movie, and clearly stole a lot of influence from it. So this film is fantastic. I really, really like it. So yeah, so that was 1971. Now, at the same time, like I said, so far we've talked about 3 films from Mario Bava. He's just one of the premier Giallo directors. But at the same time, another director who is actually probably more famous is, of course, Dario Argento. He made his debut a year prior to this, in 1970, with the film called The Bird with the Crystal Plumage from 1970. And that was basically most people's introduction to Dario Argento and his style of the Giallo film. And it was incredibly successful. He brought a new style, just a new. It's really hard to pin it down, but his style of filmmaking is just beautiful. He kind of ramped up the violence a little bit. Some may criticize that his violence towards women is a little over the top. But yeah, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage was a fantastic giallo. And then after that, 1971, same year as A Bay of Blood was released, he released 2 films. The Cat o' Nine Tails, which was, again, a fantastic giallo. And then another film called Four Flies on Grey Velvet. These first 3 films, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Cat o' Nine Tails, and Four Flies on Grey Velvet, are called what a lot of people consider his Animal Trilogy. Because you have the bird, you have the cat, and you have the flies. So it's called the Animal Trilogy. All 3 of these films very similar, different stories, but they're the style, the just the lighting, the cinematography, all of it's very similar. You can't go wrong with any of these. I love all 3 of these films. Yeah, they're just fantastic. So this was between 1970 and 1971, these 3 films. But it wasn't until 1975, his next giallo film, where most people agree he hit the pinnacle, not just for him, but of the entire giallo subgenre, with Deep Red. Again, another Dario Argento film, 1975. Many people consider this the masterpiece, one of the best Italian giallos ever made. And it's hard to argue. This film is just it's so good. There's such a good story, a good mystery. The lighting, the cinematography, just the camera work, just everything about it, just so stylish, and just it's really hard to. If you haven't seen these films, it's really hard to explain what they do, and they're just beautiful filmmaking. And like I said, this is one of the best giallos ever made, in my opinion. So yeah, so basically from like 1963 up until 1975, Mario Bava and Dario Argento just kept pumping out fantastic Italian Giallos. Like I said, there's lots more during this period. There's just one more I want to talk about that I feel like if you haven't seen any of these, go check them out any way you can. But there's one more. I just want before we move on from the Giallo. Um, it's from a couple years prior to this, 1973. It's a film from an Italian director called Sergio Martino, and it is Torso. I just adore this film. Um, this this film of all the giallos I just talked about and showed, this is the one that feels the most like a slasher film. That an 80s slasher film. It just there's a sleaziness to this. There's a mean spirited that kills, but it just it really feels like an 80s slasher, but at the same time it's clearly a giallo. Um, this film is fantastic. There's some shots in this, some scenes that are just so beautifully well done. Like the just filmed so beautifully. Um, and I have to say, this may be the one film that has the most beautiful women I've ever seen. And of course, they all take their clothes off. But it's just every single woman in this film is just knockouts, unbelievable. It was one of the first things that stood out to me. I was like, I cannot believe how beautiful the women are in this film, and there's just so many of them. It's irrelevant to what we're talking about. I'm just a note. It's so good. Um, but yes, so definitely if check out Torso. It's so good. Um, there's a scene near the end, like the finale of this film, the tension. They just have a way of creating so much on-screen tension. Um, it's really good. I really enjoy this film. Uh, so yeah, so that's basically a little brief history of the giallo, and it's just some. I just want to highlight some of the more popular some of my favorite giallo films, because they really do play a part in what was to become um, for the 80s slasher. So when all this was going on, like 70, 71, 73, 75, this was kind of a film explosion. It was kind of a big thing in Italy, and people in North America were starting to take notice of these stylish, flashy horror films with like lots of blood, lots of violence, and North America started taking notice. So that kind of leads into our next subgenre, which is commonly known as the proto slasher. Um, Now, 1974, in North America, two really important films came out that really inspired the 80s slasher. Now, this first one, I'll just put it right here. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, Tobe Hooper. This is an incredibly important film. Everybody knows this film, of course. But it really laid the groundwork for a new type of horror film, a visceral type of horror. It was in your face. It was loud. It was scary. It just really affected people. And it was made with a very, very low budget, and it was really successful. So when these type of movies, this was kind of the film that kind of made people realize, like, wow, you can put together spend not a lot of money on a budget, and you can be really successful at the box office, and that opens eyes for filmmakers, and um, it really expands the horror genre. So yeah, so that this film, now I'll be honest, I, people lump this in the proto slasher category. They feel it's a slasher. I don't view this film as a slasher myself. There's slasher elements for sure. But this thing is kind of a thing of its own. I don't really know how to classify it, to be honest. There is slasher elements, but it's like I said, it's something else. It really is, and it's fantastic. I obviously I love this film. Um, but yeah, this is one of the first, what people consider the proto slasher. But the next film, also from 1974, is Black Christmas. Now, in my opinion, this is the first slasher film. For me, like in the truest sense of the term slasher. Like I said, there's been lots of things before, Psycho, the Giallos, that have slasher elements. I view this as the first slasher. Um, this is, yeah, I really like this film. 1974. The director from this is Bob Clark, um, who's Canadian, by the way. I'll throw that in there. Um, yeah, this film, man, I like this film. It's so funny. This film, Bob Clark, he directed this film. Who, like I just said, I consider the first and one of the most important proto slashers. After this, he went on to direct a little film called Porky's, um, which is considered by some as the best and one of the first '80s teen sex comedies. And then after that, he went on to direct a film called A Christmas Story, which is one of most people's beloved Christmas films. So it's incredible. Bob Clark, just a little side note, but, he just, how important is that guy, Yeah, but anyways, Black Christmas, um, just a fantastic film. It's really a moody film. It's not your typical '80s slasher, because again, it was finding its way in this horror genre. Um, but yeah, it's clearly a slasher film, an early one at that. Set around Christmas time in a big old, it's like a sorority house. It's like a huge old house. Just a fantastic setting, fantastic film. There's some legendary shots in this that will really stay with you. Um, yeah, this is a good one. So basically, from this period until the end of the '70s, films like this and Texas Chainsaw Massacre really contributed to more people um, um, creating these proto slasher films. It became more and more popular. So after these were released, there's a few other ones I'd like to highlight. Um, the first of these, from 1976, is a film called Alice, Sweet Alice, starring Brooke Shields. Also in 1976 is a movie called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Also from 1976, kind of, is this film called Savage Weekend. This was made in 1976. It didn't get released until 1979. So it's one of those, release production date kind of things. But it was made in 1976. And again, it's like your early proto slasher type film. Really fun. I like this one. Then 1977, we have Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes. This one, popular film. Again, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I struggle with, is this an actual slasher? There's slasher elements, it's kind of its own thing. But yeah, again, it's just following the chain that, these films laid out, and they're getting closer and closer to what we've come to know as the '80s slasher. Um, so yeah, and then the last one I'll talk about is 1979. There's a film called Tourist Trap. Um, Again, just an earlier proto slasher. So all those came in the 70s. But of course, we're going to skip back 1 year to 1978, and this is the film that basically shaped the next decade of horror films. Um, so all those ones before that, they were coming out, and they were creating a theme, like these slashers. 1978, John Carpenter um, created Halloween. And we all know about Halloween. It's a masterpiece in terror and tension. But it was all those other films that I talked about before. They did okay. During the time they did okay at the box office. But this film was incredibly successful. Um, this film had a budget of only $325,000. It made $47 million. Think about that. 325,000, and it raked in 47 million. When something like this happens, filmmakers all over the world take notice, because you can get any kind of investor to invest $300,000 if the return is 47 million. And that is, this directly led to the formation of the 80s slasher. Once people started to realize that they can make these hack and slash films, if they do it the right way, they can have this success. And that's exactly what happened. 78, and then people started trying to get this formula, like figure out what's the formula, like why did this do so well. And it was between this and 1980, there were some films that came out that just they tried, it didn't quite do it. But of course, in May of 1980, this happened. And just like Halloween, they had the perfect formula. They did it exactly right, with not only with the movie, but with the marketing and the word of mouth. And again, a small budget that just blew up. And once they saw it happen with Halloween, and they saw it happen with this, that was it. The 80s slasher craze was here, and everyone was, boom, we want to make the next Friday the 13th. And and that's basically what happened. So this, of course, success of this led to that. And then the success of that, led to films like that, which of course led to films like this, which of course led to films like this. What? Yeah. This is my only Beta Max 80 slasher. When I bought it, it came in this, and when I took it home, pleasantly surprised, this was inside. So yeah, Halloween directly led to Friday the 13th, and Friday the 13th led to all its sequels and everything else that came after it. And it's just kind of a beautiful thing how it all came together. So that's basically it, guys. I just wanted to give a brief rundown. Nothing too in depth, but just highlight a few of the films that, if you're not familiar with some of these films that I showed, I just kind of wanted to bring them to your attention. Seek them out, try to find them. They're a lot of fun. They're really good. And as you watch some of these older films, like if you're a big fan of the 80s slashers, watching these films, you're gonna see though bits and pieces here and there sprinkled in where a lot of these films took their inspiration from. And for me, I find that fascinating. I like to see where something, like especially something that I love, I like to see where it came from, like what inspired it, like where how did it get to where it got. And it's kind of a fascinating thing. So that's it. So hopefully there's something here that you guys didn't know, haven't seen, and maybe you can go and check it out. Yeah. So that's it. So again, like always, thanks for watching. It helps a lot if you could subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment if you guys have seen any of these films, any of the Giallos or the proto slashers, anything that I didn't talk about that you think should have made the video, that was really important. Whether you consider Texas Chainsaw Massacre a slasher or not, Hills Have Eyes, same thing. I'm curious to know what you guys think. So yeah, leave a comment below, and yeah, until next time. All right, see ya.